Welcome to the 8th and final video in our paid search audit. Again, I hope you guys have been enjoying this audit series. If you want to check out any of the previous videos, you can look right here. And if you have any other suggestions for future series that you'd like us to do, let us know in the comments. And like I've said before, if you don't like the series, just don't tell me. Don't hurt my feelings. That's not very nice. Anyway, today I want to talk about one of the areas that I think is pretty often overlooked when it comes to audits, and that's the Change History tab in Google Ads. You'd be surprised how much change history can tell you about what's happening in an account or what's not happening. So in this video, I want to walk you through some examples of things that we commonly see in the change history that raise red flags, and then talk about a regular cadence for tasks that we usually suggest to clients who need a little bit of help understanding what their change history should look like. We're going to start in a slightly smaller account that we recently audited to try and get an example of what a very common change history looks like. Now, as I mentioned, this is lower volume, so usually that means less changes, but there are some things that we definitely found in this account that we thought needed to be called out from the management side, because that's really what change history does. It tells you how an account is being managed on a regular basis. Now, although we're doing this at the end of this audit series, that doesn't mean that we don't check in to change history throughout the regular audits. If something stands out as really strains performance, we're probably going to try to check into the change history and see if anything precipitated that change, and then depending on what we find, might make sense for us to call that out or try and look elsewhere for whatever caused the performance fluctuation. So since I already have it on the screen, the one thing that I want to call out for this account is that conversions and costs seem pretty fluctuant, but then in June everything was down. And since the cost and conversions were both down, it seems like everything was paused. We'll go check and make sure that that's actually what happened. But otherwise, everything else seems to work pretty close in tandem. Conversions going up when cost goes up, going down when cost goes down. So let's go take a look at this campaign. We're going to head down into change history. And I have my date range set for the beginning of the year to August 31st. So effectively 8 months worth of account performance to review. One thing I want to tweak just to see, based on the fact that we think the campaigns were paused at one point, I want to change this to cost and conversions. Yeah, so we can see that there was some cost at the beginning, then conversions started to trickle in, but then cost and conversions kind of turned off at the same time, got reactivated, kept moving. Okay, so the first thing when we come into change history, and I'm not going to scroll for this because then we're already going to have to start blurring things, but a little shortcut is that when you come down, you'll start to see these little buttons right above the table of changes that we'll get to here in just a second. This is a pretty telling change history already off the bat because we can see that budget, bidding, and status have dark gray text, while all of the others have light gray text. Basically, that means that there were no changes to audience, location, language, conversion, asset, feed, or other during this time period. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is a smaller account. It's got lower volume. That might not be a problem, but this is a really quick shortcut to start to see how many types of changes have been happening over an 8-month period. Even though one of the months everything was probably paused, might like to see more changes to these different adjustment types than what we're seeing here. Now, the next thing I want to do is look to see how many changes were made over this 8-month period. So as we start to scroll down, we'll see our table here. We've got some decent line items here. Okay, there's a number of them. So if I scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see something that looks like this. 1 out of 50 of more than 50. Unfortunately, Google does not tell you right off the bat how many changes were made. So usually what I do is just take this toggle, set it to 500. Now it's going to show me all the rows. I scroll all the way down again. Okay, 79. So only once you have everything opened up does it show you how many changes were made during this time period. That's about 10 changes a month. It's not terrible for an account with lower volume, so not a big deal here. But one thing that I failed to mention on the campaigns tab, so let me hop back there, is that all of the campaigns that are active are CPC enhanced bidding. They are all manual bid campaigns. So the fact that we only have on average 10 changes a month tells me that we might not be getting as many bid adjustments as I would like to see. Okay, back to change history. Everything's still already opened up. We're still at the 500. And to be honest, usually what I do is I just sort this so I can find the first change in the account. That starts on February 8th. And then usually I just start marching through the changes. I want to see what's going on here. So February 8th, we had an ad group max CPC increased from $1.80 to $3.88. Okay. Now we're starting to see keyword changes, got some bid increases, got some bid decreases. Now we've got one that's an increase. We're increasing budget on Valentine's Day. Very nice. Budget increase again, still on February 14th. Looks like a number of the rest of the changes were done on February 14th as well. Ad group bids increased, individual keywords increased, another ad group bid, more phrase match keywords increased. Now here's something interesting. This keyword right here was increased from 285 to 356 at 9 in the morning on Valentine's Day. And then the exact same keyword down here was increased from that 356 to 719. That's a pretty big bid change happening all at once. So unless there's a specific strategy behind this, I would probably call out that we want to make more incremental bid changes more frequently, rather than just having 2 bid increases that effectively increases the bid by 150% all in one day. Not really my favorite tactic. Still on February 14th, seeing a lot of increases. Here, I would probably check to make sure that these phrase match keywords weren't this same one that we've highlighted up here. I know for a fact that they're not because I've already looked at them. And then campaign status. So we're getting things turned on, activated, and budget raise. Okay, so it looks like in mid-February, we're trying to get more volume through, which definitely correlates with what we were seeing in the account performance. So as I keep scrolling down, now we're into a little later February, just 3 days later. We're starting to see some ad groups paused. All that's fine. And then change history looks like we take a break. We go from February 18th to April 10th. We're adding image extensions based on the recommendations tab. That's honestly fine. Ideally, you should have images across the board. So odds are, I probably found when we did the assets portion of the audit that they had some images in some places, but not everywhere. So I'd recommend extending that. But then change history skips down to May. And all these campaigns are changed. They go from active to paused. This is going to be what we see when all the spend, conversions, and everything flatlined. So that goes to May. Next changes come late June, where budgets are decreased. Campaigns are activated again, so we started getting some more volume through there. As we keep scrolling, we start to see changes in July of mostly bid increases, but some decreases mixed in. And then as we keep scrolling, we get all the way through here. Got campaign status changed. Again, turning campaigns on, getting more volume, but decreasing bids, all this stuff. Okay, I'm going to keep scrolling down. We're seeing lots of bid decreases across the board. July 5th and July 8th, more bid decreases. Pretty much everything is getting decreased. July 8th, more decreases across the board. Starting to get some keywords that are being paused on July 8th. So lots of changes on July 8th. And then everything skips to August 20th, where 10 exact match keywords were paused based on the internal tool, meaning that they didn't have any volume coming through them, so they got paused. So although we said that on average we were seeing 10 changes per month, what it actually looks like is we're seeing big amounts of changes 2 or 3 times throughout the year. February, we really ramped stuff up. May, paused a bunch of stuff. June, ramped it back up. July, pulled it back down. So it's no wonder that there's lots of fluctuation in this account. One of the things that we recommended is coming up with a regular cadence of changes for the account. We'll talk about that here at the end of the video. But aside from the degree of the bid changes, this client is making the adjustments that we want to be made in the account. They're just not making it at the right intervals and of the right degrees that we would like to see. I want to take a look at one more account that we've got. This is the other account that we mentioned that we've audited. This is the one we walked through in the previous video where we talked about long-term performance trends. I have the same date range here, January 1st, August 31st. So at the account level, I'm still going to head down to change history real quick. And then to start, you'll notice that a lot more of these sections here are highlighted. So it means that they did make changes to other, status, asset, conversion, location, audience, bidding, and budget during this time period. That's good because this account has a ton more volume coming through than the one we just looked at. This makes more sense to me. If anything, they're checking all the boxes because language, they don't do any foreign language advertising, so language doesn't need to be changed. And the feed, this is a B2B client, and they don't have any product feeds, so there's no need to have changes there. So if anything, they're checking all the boxes. Now let's go down and get an understanding of frequency. Again, all the way to the bottom. See, just says 50, more than 50. Super helpful. Open this up to 500. And now we've got 500 rows of more than 500 changes. So at this point, they're managing stuff a lot. They're making a lot of changes. Looking at the account level for this isn't going to help because there are so many changes. Instead, what makes more sense is to focus on an individual campaign and understand how those campaigns are being managed. Usually, if they're managing one campaign one way, they're managing other campaigns at least somewhat similarly. So we'd probably spot check a few campaigns to see how that's going. But for this account, if you watched the previous video, you know there was one that had decent performance and then everything tanked. We had some theories about what might have caused those issues. This is one of those fun scenarios where we would have checked the change history going along, but that didn't fit into the audit series plan, so we didn't talk about that at that point. But we're going to talk about it now. So just for a shortcut, I know that this campaign right here happens to be the one that we were going to use. So now during the time period from January 1st to August 31st, this campaign by itself had 126 changes. That's pretty good. It's got a decent amount of volume. It's looking at maybe 15 changes per month. So overall, no problems with that. But as you'll remember, there were some specific areas where we saw performance decreases. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top. I'm going to change my performance chart to be monthly. And now we have the conversion value divided by cost. So the ROAS, it was at 126. Then 185, 162, 188, and then it just kind of tanks to 0.89 and gets worse and worse. So these little triangles down here can be really helpful because they tell you how many changes and what types of changes were made during those months. And clearly, nothing that happened in March or previous caused the issue, and nothing happened in June or beyond that caused the issue because performance was already low by then. Now, while May might look like the month that everything tanked, chances are there was something that happened in April that caused that to happen. So when I see big performance fluctuations like this, I'm actually going to change my date range to focus just on April to May and see what happened during that time period. Now we're looking at just those 2 months. I'm going to adjust this back to weekly. Definitely looks like something was happening kind of at the beginning of April. Probably some of these changes precipitated why everything was low down here. You can see that all of the types of changes have adjusted. So now we've got just budget, bidding, status, and other. So we know it wasn't anything that happened to audience, anything like that. But there is one sneaky thing in here. So we'll call that out when we get to it. So right now, I'm going to go back and put this in chronological order as we go down the page. And I want to just start by getting an understanding of what the changes were. And right off the bat, something stands out to me. Target ROAS was 100% at the campaign level. Anytime you see language that says target ROAS was 100%, but it doesn't tell you what it is, means that the ROAS target was just removed completely. There was no ROAS target during this time period. So Google doesn't have a lower bumper to hit up against to say, if ROAS is less than 100%, this is a problem for me. So that could definitely be a big reason what caused it. But if we keep going down, we can start to see some other things. The budget was decreased from $2,200 to $1,800 on April 4th. Got a lot of changes on April 4th. Got some ad groups that were paused. Still on April 4th, we've got a budget decrease, budget decrease, budget decrease. So in total, we went from a budget of $2,200 on this campaign to $1,000 on this campaign in the exact same day. This is a huge change. The budget was cut by more than 50%. If you remember from the previous video, the cost per conversion on this campaign was closer to $2,000. So now we don't even have enough budget to average one conversion per day, and we've removed the target ROAS on the campaign. So we've basically told Google, spend my $1,000 as fast as possible without any ROAS concerns, but also we've removed the ability for it to generate at least on average one conversion per day because the cost per conversion is so high, which then limits its ability to generate conversions, learn on that, and improve performance. So a double whammy in terms of removing anything that would help ROAS perform. That to me seems pretty obvious as to why performance started to go down. But if we keep going down here, there's another section. On April 8th, we see negative countries were changed. Now, this is that little sneaky one that I talked about earlier. If we open these up, you can see that the bid adjustments for some of these countries were removed. That one's not very helpful. But if we come up here, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, and Hungary that used to be included in targeting are now excluded. Again, we already talked about the performance trends of those in the previous video and how this was a problem. We suggested to turn some of these back on. Same thing happens down here. Netherlands, Poland, Romania, all excluded now on April 8th. But this is why you need to check the line items in the change history and not rely just on the buttons. I don't know about you, but I call these countries locations, and these are not showing up as a location change in this setting. These are probably going to show up under the other category, which is a little bit silly to me. They're clearly locations. But now we're seeing that on April 8th, we had all of these countries removed. After, on April 4th, we lowered the target ROAS and we decreased the budget by half. So if we keep going down just a little bit, we can see that on April 8th, a few other things were changed. Bid adjustments, these are all for countries that are still activated and they're not doing a ton, but they're also being ignored because the bid strategy of maximize conversion value does not pay attention to them. So we'll skip over those. But then if we keep coming down, April 11th, we've got more budget decrease, 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 increase, and decrease. So let's just go for the last one because that's the one that matters. Budget is now 820. 1 week ago, on April 4th, budget was 2,200. Now it's down to 820. So now we're really pulling stuff back. And I think all of this is kind of how this campaign just saw much lower performance. We did see an ad group enabled here with some new keywords. This is just a name change for the campaign. No reason to open that up. Ad group paused. We've got some labels added. We've got some exact match terms added. And then some status changes going from pause to active, so trying to get more volume through. This is down in May, so we've taken a little bit of time, noticed we're not seeing as much volume, maybe starting to add some keywords, try and get some back. One exact match keyword was then paused, same time in May. Still on May 6th, got a lot of keywords that are now being paused. If we scroll down, May 8th, auto-applied recommendation, redundant keywords, so if I open these up. This I found really interesting. This is an auto-apply of pausing a term because it's a duplicate term. This keyword here, I have it blurred out and I'm sorry about that, but this keyword is one of the keywords that was added just 2 days ahead of time. This is the same keyword. So they added it to the campaign on May 6th and then Google 2 days later said, no, that's a redundant keyword. We're going to pause it. This is a great reason to not have your auto-apply changes on because clearly they wanted this active and Google immediately turned it off. They probably didn't know. And they might have come back months later and not realized why this keyword was inactive because they added it, they had it active, Google turned it off. Google not only turned it off, but they removed the keyword from the campaign. So we definitely called out to turn off auto-apply recommendations here, but clearly the way that this campaign was managed is what ended up probably causing the reason why all of the ROAS went down. Now, we talked to the client about this. We understood why they made these changes. But again, all of these things compounding on top of each other, big degrees of changes, removing guardrails, really saw this campaign see much lower performance than it had previously. And maybe a lighter hand and some potentially different changes would have had a different outcome. Overall, when we review an account for change history, unless we're looking at it to answer specific reasons why performance changed, like we did in the account that we just looked at, we look at it at the end because that tells us just their management style. And personally, I like not knowing that before I go into the account. I want the data to speak for itself, and only afterward do we think that maybe the people had something to do with the reason that they came to us with an audit in the first place. As we saw earlier, one of these had not very many changes and one had a lot of changes, but the degrees and the frequency just weren't what we wanted to see. So on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, we're usually looking for things like this. If you're on manual CPC, we want to see your keyword bids being tweaked up, down, moving them all around based on performance. Same thing for budget, as well as new negatives. Odds are on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, you're probably looking through search queries. So ideally, you're finding new terms to add as negatives. All of these are small incremental changes. For the keyword bids and budget tweaks, we're talking 5, 10, 15% on a weekly basis, just to keep things moving in the right direction. Huge changes can cause big impacts on performance. So unless you're starting a specific test, it might make sense to make more incremental changes on your way to what you want to eventually get to. On a monthly basis, we're looking for more of those keyword status changes. You've probably had enough volume to decide if you want to turn something on or turn it off. So those types of changes are usually less frequent than the different bid and budget adjustments. We also want to see ad copy test turnover. At no point in any of the change history today did we see anything with ad copy. Over that 8-month period, both accounts retained all of the same ad copy the whole time. Nothing was activated, nothing was paused, nothing was added. It was all the same. So those are probably stale and need to be rotated out. Same thing would be for asset reviews. We saw a couple images added to one campaign in one account, but ideally, you're testing your site links, your callouts, your structured snippets at the very minimum, and all of the other extensions can also be rotated in as well. Now, on bigger timescales like monthly changes, bid strategy tweaks, so the adjustment to the target ROAS, or bid modifier adjustments, whether it's audience, location, device, ad schedule, whatever, these are probably being made more on this monthly timescale. Again, we don't love the idea of just completely removing ROAS unless there's something that you really want to see come through there. But that's the type of change that we saw at once in the account, and that was probably an okay cadence because we didn't want to make too many big changes like that. And then lastly, quarterly changes. What do we want to see multiple times a year, but not so often as every month? This is probably going to be a bid strategy test. If anything, for the campaign that we looked at just last before I jumped into these slides, rather than removing ROAS completely from the existing campaign, probably would have set up a campaign experiment to keep the existing campaign with that 100% target ROAS, and then a campaign experiment without the target ROAS in place using just maximize conversion value bidding. That would have been a better setup for me, but unfortunately, that's not what happened. At this time, we also want to see keyword, ad group, campaign additions, any of the new keyword research, anything you've seen in search terms. In both accounts, we saw keywords being added, ad groups being added. All of that honestly looked fine. And at this time, we might also see audience changes, whether it's for retargeting or just observation. These types of changes usually take a little longer scale to get enough data to understand what's working, what's not, and make adjustments. So these three buckets that I just talked about, the weekly, monthly, and quarterly changes, are not set in stone. This is just to give you an idea as to what you should be looking at with the change history. But as you could tell by those campaigns, you can really see how accounts get managed into certain positions or how lack of management can cause some issues. And with that, we are at the end of our Paid Search Audit Series. If you have any additional questions about the change history portion or anything else when it comes to auditing paid search campaigns, I'd love to hear your questions in the comments below. Thanks for watching our video. We really appreciate it. If you liked it, give us a thumbs up below. If you really liked it, maybe think about subscribing to the Paid Media Pros YouTube channel and you'll get alerted every time a new video drops.
If you really liked it, you can help support the channel by checking out some of the t-shirts that we're wearing on our merch shelf, as well as looking at the Super Thanks button.